Langley, Virginia, 1974. A CIA analyst opens a sealed envelope marked SCANATE. Inside, a hand-drawn sketch from a man named Pat Price, former police officer, Scientologist, and professional psychic. The target, a Soviet research facility near Semipalatinsk, Kazakhstan. Pat's never been within 5,000 miles of it. He's been given nothing but map coordinates and the instruction, describe what you see. So he draws a gantry crane, rail-mounted, massive, and 60-foot steel spheres welded from segments. 3 years later, satellite photos confirm it. Everything matches. If consciousness ends at the skull, that's a problem. If it doesn't, the CIA just spent $20 million to find out. This is theoretical nonsense. And unfortunately for you, I'm your host, Jake Vance. Last time we talked about what happens when the brain flatlines and consciousness doesn't. Today we're asking what happens when consciousness leaves the body on purpose, or at least tries to. From 1972 to 1995, the U.S. intelligence community funded the strangest research program of the Cold War, remote viewing. The premise? Trained psychics could spy on Soviet installations using nothing but their minds. Over 23 years, they conducted more than 26,000 trials. Statistical significance? Off the charts. Practical intelligence value? Basically none. But the data refuses to go away. So today isn't about ESP or astral travel. It's about a scientific paradox hiding in classified memos. What do you do when the statistics say something impossible is happening? The Cold War bred paranoia in interesting shapes. In 1970, CIA analysts concluded the Soviets were spending somewhere between 60 and 300 million rubles per year on psychotronic research. That's the polite term for weaponized telepathy. The fear wasn't just that the Russians might read minds. It was that we'd wake up one morning and find out they'd been doing it for a decade while we laughed it off as science fiction. So in 1972, the CIA did what anxious governments do, threw money at the problem. They called it SCANATE, scan by coordinate, and they hired 2 laser physicists to run it. Because apparently, when you need to prove minds can leave bodies, you start with the people who understand coherent light. Russell Targ and Harold Puthoff. Both had PhDs in physics. Both worked at Stanford Research Institute, one of America's premier research labs. Neither had any business studying psychics. But in 1972, they started anyway. Their first subjects were Ingo Swann, a New York artist, and Pat Price, a former cop. Both Scientologists, both recruited through, let's call them unconventional channels. The experimental protocol was straightforward. A beacon person would drive to a random location around the San Francisco Bay Area. The subject, locked in a shielded room at SRI, would try to describe where the beacon ended up. Then independent judges, people who'd never seen the locations, would try to match the descriptions to the actual sites. If it worked, you'd beat chance. If it really worked, you'd freak out the CIA. In 1974, Targ and Puthoff published their results in Nature, one of the most prestigious journals in science. Title, Information Transfer Under Conditions of Sensory Shielding. Translation, we think minds can see things they shouldn't be able to see. 55 trials, accuracy far beyond chance. Independent judges matched descriptions to targets at rates that shouldn't happen if people were just guessing. The scientific community's response was mixed. Some said, interesting, let's replicate this. Others said, this is either fraud, incompetence, or a statistical fluke. A few just said, what the hell is Nature doing publishing this? But the CIA didn't care about peer review, they cared about results, and Pat Price was delivering some very strange results. Pat Price's most famous session happened in 1974. He was given coordinates in Central Asia, nothing else, just numbers, 39°40 north, 67°30 east. He described what he saw, a large sprawling facility, buildings recessed into the side of a mountain, a missile test site, gantry cranes, and those spheres, massive, 60 feet in diameter, made from curved metal segments. 3 years later, KH-11 satellites photographed the Semipalatinsk test site. Everything matched, down to the welded steel spheres Pat drew in 1974. This wasn't a case of vague hits retrospectively fitted to data. This was specific. This was architectural detail. This was right. It also drove intelligence analysts absolutely insane. Because if remote viewing works, you don't need satellites. You don't need spies. You just need a Scientologist in a comfortable chair. And if it doesn't work, you've just confirmed the most spectacular accidental intelligence hit of the Cold War. Nobody knew what to do with it. For 23 years, the CIA, DIA, and Army intelligence kept funding remote viewing programs. Not because they loved it, because they couldn't afford to ignore the possibility that it worked. The data kept piling up, and the data kept refusing to go away. From 1972 to 1995, more than 26,000 remote viewing trials were conducted across multiple programs: SCANATE, Grill Flame, Center Lane, Sunstreak, and finally, Stargate. Meta-analyses across thousands of trials consistently showed results beyond chance. Some independent reviewers calculated the odds against chance at 10 trillion to 1. But here's the paradox. The more controlled the experiment, the weaker the effect, which meant either it's real but fragile, and observation disrupts it like some quantum effect, or it's not real, and tighter controls strip away wishful thinking. A 1994 SAIC meta-analysis examined remote viewing studies from 1973 to 1988. The findings were, to put it mildly, uncomfortable. Statistical significance? Absolutely. 10 independent judges blind-rated viewer transcripts against actual photos. The correlation was significant, but more importantly, 2 experienced remote viewers were given the same targets over 354 sessions. Their descriptions? Basically identical. The correlation between 2 top viewers reached 0.901, near perfect consistency. You don't get consistency like that from noise. The protocols revealed some truly bizarre patterns. Distance? Viewers performed equally well whether the target was across the street or 10,000 kilometers away. No signal decay, no drop-off. Time. Precognition worked as well as real-time viewing, meaning you could accurately describe a target that hadn't been selected yet. Electromagnetic shielding, Faraday cages, rooms designed to block all EM radiation had no effect. Beacon person, turns out you didn't even need someone at the target site. Coordinate remote viewing, using just latitude and longitude, worked just as well. If this were information transfer, it didn't behave like any signal we know about. But here's where it gets uncomfortable. A 2023 meta-analysis by Tresoldi and Katz examined 36 studies from 1974 to 2022. Overall accuracy, 19.3% above chance. Effect size, 0.34. Statistically robust? Yes. Useful for intelligence gathering? Not even close. 75% accuracy for objectively verifiable content sounds good until you realize the other 25% could get people killed. The CIA's final assessment was blunt. No remote viewing report ever provided actionable information for any intelligence operation. They proved something worked, but not what, and not well enough to matter. Theory is one thing, field operations are another. Let's look at what happened when remote viewing left the lab. Joseph McMoneagle, remote viewer number 001. Army intelligence officer, near-death experiencer after a heart attack in Germany. Remember those? Remember what kind of effects NDEs were left with? Between 1978 and 1984, he claims involvement in roughly 450 missions. His most famous session happened in September 1979. Target, coordinates near a northern Russian lake. McMoneagle described a massive submarine under construction, 18 to 20 angled missile tubes, a flat deck, double hull, unusual propulsion system. Then he added a prediction. It would launch in 4 months, after the Russians blast a channel connecting the building to open water. In January 1980, satellite imagery confirmed everything. The world's largest submarine, exactly as described, launched through a newly blasted channel. The intelligence community called it an 8-martini result, as in, you need 8 martinis to process what just happened. The problem is, for every Typhoon-class submarine, there were 100 sessions that produced nothing useful. Pat Price described the wrong hostages during the Iran hostage crisis. Remote viewers failed to locate missing aircraft. They gave detailed descriptions of buildings that turned out to be fantasy. When the program ended in 1995, the final report was damning. No remote viewing report ever provided actionable information, spectacular hits, statistical anomalies, 0 operational value. In 1995, the American Institutes for Research conducted an independent evaluation of the Stargate program. The panel included 2 people with very different perspectives. Jessica Utz, statistician at UC Davis, a parapsychology proponent. Her conclusion? Using the standards applied to any other area of science, it is concluded that psychic functioning has been well established. The statistical results are far beyond what is expected by chance. She noted that gifted subjects scored 5 to 15% above chance. Effect sizes were consistent across different laboratories. Her recommendation? Stop wasting time on proof-of-concept experiments. Start studying the mechanism. Translation? We proved it works. Now figure out how. Ray Hyman, psychologist at the University of Oregon, a noted skeptic. His conclusion? The case for psychic functioning seems better than it ever has been. The effect sizes reported are too large and consistent to be dismissed as statistical flukes. However, the conclusions are premature to say the least. His objections? No positive theory for how it works. Evidence relies entirely on ruling out normal explanations, hasn't been independently replicated to his satisfaction. Most critically, the overwhelming amount of data generated by the viewers is vague, general, and way off target. Not good enough for intelligence work. Both Utz and Hyman agreed on several key points. The SAIC experiments were methodologically sound, statistical effects existed, independent judging was essential. The data showed something beyond chance. Where they disagreed, whether statistical anomalies count as evidence for paranormal phenomena. Utz said yes, Hyman said not yet. Science in a nutshell. The AIR panel's recommendation was decisive. No remote viewing report ever provided actionable information for any intelligence operation. David Goslin, AIR president, was blunt. There's no documented evidence it had any value to the intelligence community. The CIA terminated the $20 million program in 1995. Conclusion: remote viewing consistently failed to produce actionable intelligence. But the data didn't go away, and 28 years later we're still arguing about what it means. While the military was trying to train psychics, neuroscientists were accidentally discovering how to turn consciousness loose from the body. Not through meditation or training, through electricity. 2002, University Hospital, Geneva. A 43-year-old woman with epilepsy undergoes pre-surgical evaluation. Neurosurgeon Olaf Blanke applies low-intensity electrical stimulation to her right angular gyrus, a region called the temporoparietal junction, or TPJ. She reports feeling like she's sinking into the bed. Her legs seem shorter. He increases the intensity. She says, "I see myself lying in bed from above, but I only see my legs and lower trunk." Full out-of-body experience, induced on demand, repeatable. This was the first controlled demonstration that OBEs could be reliably triggered through direct brain manipulation. Published in Nature. No controversy, just neuroscience. The temporoparietal junction integrates multisensory information about where your body is in space. Visual signals: I see my hand. Tactile signals: I feel my hand. Proprioceptive signals: I sense where my hand is without looking. Vestibular signals: I know which way is up. The TPJ stitches all that into a unified sense of embodied self-location. Disrupt the TPJ and the stitching comes undone. Blanke called it a threefold deviance: disembodied self-identification, altered self-location, abnormal visuospatial perspective. In other words, your brain stops knowing where you are, so it guesses. And sometimes it guesses above and to the left. 2014, University of Western Ontario. Researchers found a 24-year-old woman who could voluntarily induce OBEs. She'd been doing it since childhood, called it her whoosh experience. They put her in an fMRI scanner and told her to do it, and it worked. The brain imaging showed activation of the supplementary motor area, activation of the supramarginal and posterior superior temporal GRI, overlapping the TPJ. Cerebellar activity consistent with movement sensation, deactivation of the visual cortex. Critically, this pattern was different from motor imagery. It wasn't her imagining movement, it was something else. A distinct neural signature for voluntary out-of-body experience. So now we have a baseline. Turns out leaving your body has a specific brain fingerprint. Here's what's strange. Only 5 cases of OBE induced by brain stimulation appear in the entire literature. All involve TPJ stimulation during surgery or treatment, which suggests the neural mechanisms of embodied self are remarkably robust. Despite the fact that 8 to 10% of the general population report spontaneous OBEs, so either a lot of people are having TPJ glitches we don't understand, or something else is going on. Now we get to the part that makes even skeptical neuroscientists pause. Shared death experiences. A shared death experience is when someone who isn't dying reports experiencing elements of a near-death experience while present at someone else's death. They're not having a medical emergency, they're not coding, they're just there. And then they report leaving their body, seeing the room from above, accompanying the dying person through a tunnel or toward a light, feeling overwhelming peace, which, if consciousness is just brain activity, shouldn't be happening. Marina Weiler at the University of Virginia's Division of Perceptual Studies has been pioneering research on this. She uses electrooculography, EOG, to track voluntary eye movements during OBEs. The idea, precise timing of when the experience begins, correlated with brain activity. Her 2024 and 2025 publications examine how OBEs enhance empathy and challenge mind-brain identity theories. Because here's the thing, if you can track the exact moment someone reports leaving their body and their brain is still functioning normally at that moment, then what exactly is leaving? Meanwhile, Sam Parnia, the same researcher from episode 1, is refining EEG biomarkers of consciousness during cardiac arrest. AWARE 2 found cognitive brain activity 35 to 60 minutes into CPR, gamma wave bursts, normal-looking patterns, while the person is clinically dead. If that holds up across more studies, it fundamentally challenges when consciousness ceases. Because the current assumption is, heart stops, brain shuts down in seconds, lights out. These findings say, maybe not. Robert King has collected 404 OBEs from 390 participants across 3 completed phases. The goal? Systematically distinguish NDE-related OBEs from voluntary or spontaneous ones. What features are unique to consciousness during crisis? What overlaps with meditation-induced experiences? What's just random neurological weirdness? The 2021 Bigelow Institute contest awarded $1 million for the best evidence of consciousness survival. Near-death experiences and mental mediumship scored highest on scientific rigor. Turns out dying, or almost dying, is still the most consistent way to produce these experiences, which doesn't prove survival, but it sure as hell raises questions. So let's tie this back to episode 1. We talked about consciousness persisting during brain flatlines, veridical perceptions during cardiac arrest, transformations that don't fade. Now we've looked at remote viewing, lab-induced OBEs, and shared death experiences. What's the through line? 2 models. Brain as generator. Consciousness is what the brain does. Destroy the brain, consciousness ends. Simple. Materialist. Clean. Brain as filter. Consciousness exists independently. The brain tunes it, constrains it, focuses it. Destroy the brain, and the signal's still there, just no longer localized. Federico Fagan, inventor of the microprocessor, says consciousness is a quantum information field outside spacetime. Your body is a drone. Remote viewing? That's the pilot doing reconnaissance before takeoff. Bernardo Kastrup. Analytical idealism. Reality is mind. Consciousness, at large, dissociates into individual perspectives. OBEs are moments when the dissociation weakens, and you remember you're part of the larger field. Roger Penrose and Stuart Hameroff, OR. Consciousness arises from quantum collapses in neuron microtubules. Retrocausality, effects preceding causes, might explain precognitive remote viewing. Donald Hoffman, interface theory of perception. Space-time is a user interface, not base reality. Remote viewing might be data leaks between conscious agents operating outside the interface. Different languages, same rebellion. They all say, the brain isn't the source, it's the receiver. And these are just the few we've touched on here in this series out of hundreds, maybe thousands of other people vastly smarter than I am that land in the same vicinity. We'll get to even more as we keep exploring. Here's what we know. Remote viewing produces statistically significant results across thousands of trials. Effect sizes are consistent but small. Distance and time don't seem to matter. The TPJ is critical for generating OBE phenomenology. Stimulating the TPJ can reliably induce OBEs. Some people can trigger OBEs voluntarily with distinct neural signatures. Shared death experiences suggest OBE-like states can occur in non-dying witnesses. Consciousness during cardiac arrest lasts longer than current models predict. Here's what we don't know: whether remote viewing accesses real information or generates convincing statistical noise, whether OBEs involve any actual separation from the body or just the brain's confusion about self-location, why effect sizes decrease with tighter experimental controls, how to reconcile subjective reports with objective measurements. In other words, we have data, we have theories, we don't have answers. Half a century of research says minds sometimes wander where bodies can't, or at least minds sometimes report wandering, and the statistics say those reports aren't random. But here's the paradox. The better the experimental controls, the weaker the effect. The more rigorous the methodology, the harder it is to see the signal, which means either the phenomenon is real but fragile, easily disrupted by observation, like some kind of quantum consciousness effect, or the phenomenon is artifact, and tighter controls are just better at screening out wishful thinking. Skeptics say, $20 million, 23 years, zero actionable intelligence, case closed. Proponents say, p-values don't lie, something's there. We just don't know what yet. Maybe the question isn't whether minds can leave bodies. Maybe it's what do they come back with? Because if remote viewing taught us anything, it's that spectacular hits don't mean much when they're buried in noise. And if lab-induced OBEs taught us anything, it's that the brain has an off switch for embodiment, but we don't know what turns it on naturally. The CIA closed the program, but the data didn't go away, and neuroscience keeps finding new ways consciousness misbehaves. Next time, we're going to look at what physics, simulations, holograms, video games, Elon Musk, and the universe might be able to tell us. I'm Jake Vance. This is Theoretical Nonsense. Thanks for listening, and thanks for being curious.